Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the True Life Podcast. It's Monday. It looks like we made it through the weekend. I hope everybody's having a beautiful day. I got an incredible show for you today with an incredible individual who may be one of the most well-read individuals we've ever had on the podcast. We've had him a few times before. For those who may not know, let me take a moment to introduce you to the one and only Dr. Simon van der Els, a visionary guide in the exploration of healing and wholeness. His journey from the intricate world of molecular microbiology to a holistic understanding of the meta-crisis is a testament to his commitment to unraveling the interconnected mysteries of existence. With a blend of academic prowess, contemplative practices, and a touch of the fantastical, Simon facilitates transformative conversations that stretch the boundaries of imagination and delve into the profound realms of speculative philosophy. I hope you will all join us in welcoming as we embark on a journey with Simon to explore the cosmic dimensions of healing and the uncharted territories of consciousness. Dr. Simon, thank you for being here today, my friend. How are you?
Wow, what an introduction. That's amazing. I've never been introduced in this. That sets the bar high. So let's. I'll sit up straight.
Yeah, right.
I'm doing good.
Well,
Nice
fantastic.
to be back.
Yeah, it is. It's really good to have you back here. And congratulations on the book and all the publishings. And what an interesting time we live in, right? I was looking at some of your posts and, you know, I'm not sure where we want to begin with this. Maybe a good spot is I know that you've recently finished the giant behemoth 2-volume set of The Matter with Things. Maybe we could start there, man. What do you think about it?
I finished part 1 of that.
Okay.
I'm in part 2 at the moment, and I was just joking with a friend of mine who is also interested in McGilchrist's work. I sent him. I read it and then I make pictures. And I'm like, oh, this part is really good. And I'm now in a chapter on time, and I just told him like it's a interesting mix between aha and whoa, this is amazing, and what the hell does this mean? So I'm constantly sort of, I would have to say I'm chewing my way through it, and it's taking a while. It's very, very good.
Yeah, it's one of those ones like I haven't got it. I don't know, but I've read some of McGilchrist before, and there's times you just got to set the book down and be like, okay, what's going on here? Let me just think for a minute. Let me read this a third time. Let me see what I can get out of it again. For those that may not know,
he constantly references or quotes, or he has like whole sections of these other amazing scholars and philosophers, and then I'm constantly like, okay, I might want to have to read this person or this person, and if you then check his bibliography, it's massive. So I'm thinking like, how does this man do this? So I think, yeah, the sheer amount of scholarship that goes into the work is actually, absolutely insane, and it's great because you can tell that he reads all the sources, and he reads, his mind roams wide, and he finds all these interesting citations and quotes just for the right topics. And then I also encounter like scholars that I wouldn't think that he had read. And then it's like, oh, all of a sudden he quotes that as well.
Yeah. It's interesting. I know that we've spoke a little bit about brain lateralization, but in The Matter with Things, from what I've just touched upon a little bit, and maybe you can embrace this a little bit more, is the fundamental reality unfolding in front of us seems to be favoring the left hemisphere, like this real analytical approach, but we're beginning to see how the right hemisphere interprets the world on something. Maybe you can touch on that a little bit and kind of, piece together some of the things that he's talking about.
Yeah. So the interesting thing about Ian McGilchrist's work is I think it's incredibly difficult to summarize because the way the man writes is already like
right.
He takes his time, but to make an attempt of summarizing it, I think he calls it the hemisphere hypothesis. And what he states and illustrates in his books is that we carry two ways of seeing the world within us, within our brains, and this is brain lateralization. And then in a very again, you should read his work if you're interested, but in a very, very uh, short manner, the right hemisphere is a sort of broad attention to a whole field of moving things, and while the left hemisphere is a very narrow focused attention. And there's also this lateralization that the left hemisphere is very much focused on language and tool utilization, well, all these kind of things, while the right hemisphere is more interested or deals with flow, with flowing time. So the left hemisphere also decontextualizes. So this narrow beam of attention allows us to pick up um, individual objects from their surroundings. So, and then we also see them as objects, but we create a mental image of that object. So we decontextualize it. We create a representation. So it's a represencing. And what McGilchrist says, which I really like, is that the right hemisphere deals with presencing. So the right hemisphere presence deals with everything that is happening in the moment, flow, these kind of things. And the left hemisphere is like maybe like a tractor beam that picks up objects, focuses on them, and then takes them out of the surrounding, so we can interact with them, so we can modify them and we can use them. And yeah, you were saying that and this is also McGilchrist's point. He takes a large part of his first book in the Master and His Emissary, where he describes what would a left hemisphere spherical world look like. And he takes a whole chapter for this, and he more or less describes our current world. There's this over bureaucratization and these systems. So it's very map heavy. So if the right hemisphere deals with the territory, which is lived experience, which is the physical real, and the left hemisphere deals with a map made of the territory. But if this map is super intricate and wide ranging, as the one we have now, with this hyper proliferation of information and all these legacy systems that hold, how you say, laws and all these kind of things. So this whole bureaucratic system is stereotypically something that he would call, I think, left hemispherical or left hemisphere dominated. And the problem with that shouldn't be a big problem. And important to note, it's not that we see the world either or. It's the right hemisphere sees both. So it's and he typically uses the metaphor, I think, which are the one that I really like, is when you would have to play a piece of music, that the right hemisphere initially can hear the piece of music as a whole thing and feel the experience of it. And as you are going to have to practice playing that song, the left hemisphere will have to step in to play all these the short bits that are very intricate. I'm not a musician, but the left hemisphere is more focused on the decontextualizing again. So you have to grind it out. But if you would play the entire song the way you've learned it by just the left hemisphere, then it's this disjointed thing, right? So what he then says is then in a well functioning left right hemisphere interaction, it's appreciating the whole, going into detail, and then the details get released again to join the whole again. And that's sort of the ongoing way of these two, how they interact. And what he means with a left hemisphere dominated world, or what I would mean with that, is that we're not giving up those decontextualized parts that focus on the map, is not being subsumed in any healthy whole anymore, not in the felt experience, not in the present moment. It's also with time, for instance, that we live on clock time, which is a human construct. Yeah. So.
You know, it's interesting you bring up music. I was talking to a musician friend of mine who's Adam Lopez. If you listen to, man, you're an amazing musician. And he's an old school musician. Like, he travels. He just goes from state to state, and he'll play private concerts, private parties. He'll play in clubs, wherever people want him to play, he'll play at. And, he's really good too, and he's really talented. And when he talks about putting out a new album, we talked about going to Nashville. He kind of has this rockabilly style. And I was asking him about Nashville, and he just kind of got this look on his face like, George, he goes, I don't even like talking about it. But I want to draw it out. I'm like, why not? And he goes, George, let me tell you how modern music is made in studios. You go in there and you play one chord, they record it, and they sample it, and then that becomes the chord that plays throughout the entire song. So somebody could come in and they'll play 5 chords, and then the music team will put those 5 chords together, and that becomes the song. And he goes, the same with singing. You'll say one word, they'll record it, and that becomes the song. He goes, I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in going out and playing music to people. I want to play the whole song. And you know what? I'm probably gonna fuck up from time to time. There might be some mess ups in there, but that's part of the music. I'm not gonna play the same song in Nashville that I play in Texas. Every time I play it, it's a different song. But that kind of gets back to what you were saying, as that part all of a sudden becomes the focus. And it seems like you're seeing it in music, where if I can come in and play one chord, okay, that's the left hemisphere. That's the one time, boom. And then people begin to respect that. Like, isn't that wonderful? Look, they played that one chord. No, that's not wonderful. That's not music. It's one piece that they pulled out of the whole, and they've made that the whole thing that we love. What do you think?
Yeah, and you, as you were speaking, you immediately hit another point that McGilchrist often reiterates when he wants to make this point: is for the left hemisphere, the whole thing is made up of parts. So the left hemisphere sees the whole as a thing that can be decontextualized and put into small, analyzed, so sliced into pieces, and then built up again. But for instance, if it's about a living thing, so I would call a song or music is something that is alive, it deals with flow. It's the same. For instance, let's use a morbid example. If you would dissect a dog or vivisect an animal into pieces, then it's dead. But if you were able to perfectly put it back together again, it's still dead, right?
Yep.
And that's the problem, let's say, with the left hemispherical look on things. It's seeing if the world is made out of bits, or the universe is made out of bits, or this whole experience. And then if you understand all the bits just enough, then you could build it up from the bottom and explain the whole thing. But yeah, McGilchrist's thesis is that it's just not possible, or that's a mistake. That's a left hemispherical way of seeing it. And this is also a divide in, he calls it a divide in philosophy from pre-Platonic philosophy. Like Heraclitus is more of a philosopher of flow, and then you have process philosophy and analytical philosophy. And so read the book. It's great. I often feel like if I'm talking about the book, it's like there's just so much information in there, and I love to regurgitate it, and then I'm forgetting things. And,
I wanted to bring it up in the beginning because I think it's a good segue into the way you think. You have a very diverse way at looking at the world, and I think it's because you see the whole picture. But maybe you can talk a little bit about your philosophy of life. Like, how is it that one moment you're writing about the meta crisis, and then the next moment it's rewilding? Like, how do all these things come together? Because I know you have a whole picture. But maybe you can give us a little bit of background on how the things that you've been talking about relate to one another.
Nice. That's a super nice question. Maybe I haven't even. Okay, then I haven't even thought of that. So
that's why I love it.
Let's do that. Let's do that now. Let me sense for a bit.
Take your time, man. It's a deep question.
I think what is essential to the way I think what is essential to the way that I see things, or I feel or sense things, is that the universe is alive. And coming from a Western traditional science and molecular science, the first thing that we do in molecular biology when we study something is we kill it.
Mm.
And then we look at all the bits, the molecular bits, so the DNA, the molecules, the proteins, enzymes, RNA, yada yada. We take a snapshot, so we freeze it, kill it, and then we analyze, and then we think back on how to study that life. And if we start from the idea that, or what I mean with that is that even as a biologist, we treat life in a often, not all biologists, but often in a non-sacred way, as if it's not alive, because we model physics, and the old model of physics, the old Newtonian model of physics, was based on a sort of clockwork universe of a giant mechanism. And a mechanism is a machine, is by definition not alive. Or at least in biology, often I even wrote it in my, the machine metaphor is hyper prevalent in the life sciences.
Yep.
Well, I feel more and more like that isn't the case. It isn't a machine.
Mm.
I used it as one of the propositions in my thesis. So in the thesis, you get the option where you defend your thesis to add a couple of propositions that don't necessarily have anything to do with your work that you publish in the book, but that you also want to defend. So they have to be of scientific rigor. And I used one in which I said that in bio, I have to paraphrase because I don't remember exactly what it was. But in biology, it's a bigger sin to mechanomorphize than to anthropomorphize. And what I meant with that is usually anthropomorphizing is like a massive sin in research. It's like, yeah, you cannot project human feelings or human ideas or human agency or even a sense of agency or intentionality on mechanical things. So if you look at bacteria, it's like, no, it's the selfish gene hypothesis. It just wants to survive. All these kind of things. While what I wanted to shine a light on is that if we mechanomorphize nature, then we're doing something way weirder, actually. Because when we're saying like, no, this thing is not alive, this bacteria, but it's more like a clock. It's more like a car, let's say. So it's a machine built up of parts. If we understand the parts, then and so we what I feel is that we take away by having that lens, that sort of the devitalization. So it's removing life from something living,
Right.
and by doing that, we also strip it of a lot of information that we might, if we were taking it seriously, in my opinion, we might glean way more information from it, or we would learn way more from it. And that's, I think, I'm more interested in. So what can we learn from the living world, but also, the living cosmos, more, so larger and larger.
Yeah.
And that's why I think that on the base level, the universe or the cosmos is alive, and it's a living, developing thing. And I that's why I also am interested. No, to make it short, why I'm interested, then I think that's the base motivation that I have, or the base feeling that I have, and all the work or all the reading and all the things that I like to do is connecting people back to nature, because that's the living, to the living cosmos, and embedding ourselves back into this living environment, because I sense that that is one of the ways, or one of the necessary ingredients, or strategies of making it out of the meta crisis as a species. I think we are being asked to reintegrate into the living world, and notice we are already fully integrated in the living world. I mean, mostly from here, that our map integrates in the living world, and we start living with it again.
I like that. It's It's interesting on so many levels. As you're as you're as I'm listening to what you're saying, and the idea of anthropomorphizing versus mechapomorphizing, like on some level, it makes me think of science losing a lot of its credibility. It's science on some level, and look, I'm not a scientist or anything like that, so I'm sure people are gonna get mad at me right here, but it seems to me that science is basically prophecy. We're gonna kill this thing and then try to make a prediction about the future about what happened on the past. Like that seems like prophecy to me in some ways. And I think that there's a lot of great things about the scientific method, and I'm so stoked we've had it as a vehicle to get us here, and I know it'll continue to take us great places. However, it does seem like that vehicle of science is beginning to pull parallel back to the vehicle of spirituality. Maybe spirituality is beginning to lead the race again. And when I start looking at the way in which people are looking at subjective behavior in trials, maybe not clinical trials, but they're beginning to bring the subjectivity back into questionnaires and giving it to people that have mental issues breaking down. And they're beginning to, hey, ask the family questions like, hey, is your husband less of an asshole now? Or, like these ideas that may not have something you could put a slide rule on or a ruler against that were commonly thrown out of the clinics are now being brought back in. And I think that echoes what you're saying about, look, this living form over here, we can recognize ourselves in that. And why is that a bad thing? Like that's probably a good thing. If we can recognize ourselves in this other living organism, now we have another way to look at ourselves. And you can learn a lot from that angle, right? Is that too far to think about maybe the moving around like that?
No. I agree with you, and it's good that you added that science is a very great tool. It's a very great
Of course it
epistemological
is.
tool. It's amazing.
But it doesn't
So
matter that we
never
change
for
our mind sometimes. It's okay to
exactly.
change our idea.
Yeah, it's not throwing out the. That's also my point. It's not throwing out the baby with the
Yeah,
bathwater.
agreed.
Your point on spirituality and science. I think anything that's not within the let's say current framework of a scientific field often will get banished to what we would call spirituality.
I see.
And um, I think that we're also in a place where science as a discipline has been so hyper specialized.
Yeah.
So we often use the working as a modern scientist in a let's say a um, normal field, so a standard field. It's akin to being in a centimeter of a set, or being in a hole of a centimeter wide and a kilometer deep, in how specific it is. And the so we have an incredibly high resolution of a lot of things, uh, but where what I think is where we're hitting up against certain boundaries of our current frameworks or our current paradigms of where that data fits into. So we're hitting the boundaries of or we're having problems with explaining, and then I mean we as a sort of
Right.
as the whole species,
Sure.
having problems explaining or matching these way larger problems or of how the universe works. And I'm not a physicist. I try to read a little bit on it, but I don't. I cannot match that stuff. But I do hear, and I think there's also within modern physics, quantum science, there's quite a bit of a problem trying to match all the theories, I guess.
Yeah.
But okay, I'm not well versed in that. But within biology, I would say that for me the sense is very much that we're the same as an example. For instance, uh, cancer, cancer research, and sure, there have been a lot of cancer medications for treatment of cancer. The prevention of cancer is the tools that we are using, the reductionist science tools, and the high complexity of even a single human cell it's so incredibly difficult to get to results or to get to cures. Even with so for instance, most cancer treatments have a lot of side effects, and
Yeah.
those side effects are also because we don't understand the whole system because it's so incredibly complex.
Yep.
And that's again a meta crisis problem. If we are stuck in the mindset of problem solution, and we only design our solution or only our treatment for the desired solution without taking into account second order, third order, fourth, or not nth order effects, then you wind up with more problems. So your solution is causing more problems down the road. And I have a feeling that modern man, or so 21st century humans, as we're running into all these planetary boundaries of like, well, climate change, acidification of the ocean, biodiversity crisis, all these things, we're running into all the problems of our previous solutions.
Mm.
So our the way we do industrial agriculture, which was a
Yeah.
solution
Sure.
because people needed food, and then okay, these cultivars were developed, which could be grown way closer to each other. Artificial fertilizer based on fossil carbons of the with the Haber-Bosch method. Okay, and then we can grow more and more food, but then human population also skyrockets, and now we're heading to these issues where there's soil depletion, well, all this kind of stuff. So the I think this is also a main motivator for me to try to explore, or at least for myself, and then also in my writing or in the communication that I have with people, is to develop a way of sensing the world, a novel map, or maybe or a new configuration of the map. So it can also
Yeah.
include a lot of old things. I'm not. It doesn't have to be the next best idea. I think
Hmm.
we can also look back on or there are probably already a lot of very good ways of seeing the world still alive, and most likely also in indigenous cultures,
Yeah.
different ways of interpreting different languages. Um, I think it's just a uh, I think it's a problem of um, yeah, integrating in a well thought out way that maps that actually maps, but it's a massive challenge because also the sheer amount of information that we have, and that makes it difficult also for me as an individual, for I think for any
Yeah.
individual to make sense of things, is because there's so much information, and most likely even with good scientific information it will take you a while to figure out what is actually true, because friend, you can find almost any data to fit any hypothesis.
Hmm.
And I'm not saying that any hypothesis is true, but it will take you a while to figure out whether it's true or not. And I noticed that because, or getting sort of deluged with information, it's difficult to uh, do the due diligence. So it's the slowing down and trying to integrate. So, yeah.
It's fascinating to me. I love the idea. I love what you said about we're bumping up against the problems of our previous solutions. It begins to beg the question of what were we solving for in the first place? Maybe that was the problem. Like, and you're right. There's so much information. The old one thing I know for sure is the older I get, the less I know. And that seems
Mm,
weird because you go through life thinking you know all these things. I read the history of that. Whose history? Whose history did you read? Did you read the America's history or did you read Japan's history? Did you read the
mm,
history of the boomers or the history of Generation X? Like it's constantly changing. And when you start thinking about that, you realize, okay, I get it. The people that wrote history knew it was wrong, but they had to have some sort of shared sacrifice foundation to build on. And it's not that they wanted to be horrible people. It's not that they purposely tried to lie to everybody. It's like, look, damn it, we need a foundation to build on. Let's go with
mm.
this. It's true enough. You run into this
Yep.
idea of true enough, but in this integrated world, like I don't know if true enough is good enough. What do you think, man? Is
Nice,
that too crazy?
nice. No, I like that. Yeah, yeah, or at least not true enough with the power that we're wielding. It's like,
Yes,
is
that's
this
the word.
accurate? Yeah, it's accurate enough. It's like,
Are you
okay,
sure? Yeah.
if we had like a little hammer and we were like building things, then it's like, okay, we can make some mistakes, but we're
Yeah.
using atomic weapons. And so, is this true enough? Especially when it comes to again, that problem solution mindset. It's,
Right.
can we do we identify
Right.
already? How are we identifying what is a problem? Yes or no?
Right. And
It's
problem for
very
who?
based on our
Yeah.
on our framework, how we look at things. So that's also one of the main things I'm interested in is perception, just on a sort of
Mm,
base level. How do we sense things, and then so how do we perceive things with different senses, and also in um, so it's less about what to think, and I think more about how to think.
this brings up
So
an interesting question. Yeah, go ahead.
so about uh, what are the assumptions and what are the heuristics that we use
Yeah.
to think about things, because then we sort of, I think we cannot think unbiased. Bias is depending on which glasses you put on or which
Right.
tool you use to think with, you will have a bias and an assumption. The most important thing is to then be aware of that bias and to have multiple sets of glasses. So you can
Yeah.
actually shift, and that you can know, like, okay, if I privilege this part of me that wants this and this and this, then this is my opinion. If I privilege this part of me, then I find this, and then this is my opinion. I think this is constantly happening already within us, as we are a sort of constellation of different sub personalities or smaller parts or even smaller parts. I think we are a sort of hive consciousness. Um, and within that, the central ego or whatever, that is the one that has to make the
Yep.
decision. It's like the speaker in Congress, and you have all these different parties, and at a certain moment there has to be made a executive decision. But it's being aware of what are all the opinions, who is making the decisions, so based on what are their needs and the biases. And the more, I think, again, I pull it to I pull my view to the sort of individual level to myself. But the more I become aware of this, I think the more I can also be aware of this whenever I would work in a group, or if I would have
Mm-hmm.
to work in an organization. And I think that's part of the sort of, navigating the meta crisis is a lot of inner work. It's
Yeah.
it's more inner work than work out there. I think it's more about getting really to terms with how we are as modern people. So how I would say, sometimes I struggle with the correct word, but
It's hard.
not maybe deficient. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
sure if that's the right
Makes
word, but
sense.
how lacking we are
Yes.
as modern Westerners. I would say I cannot speak for the rest of the world, but let me speak for myself.
I love the idea that you brought up adaptability. And I have this, I'm seeing this thing happen. I'm curious to get your opinion on it. I think on some level, what we're beginning to see is a fundamental shift in sense ratios in the human species. And because there's so much information, we're beginning to adapt to that. And we're going to, I believe that today's children are going to process information through their senses differently than we do. And an example of that is, but let's look at language. A large part of conflicts from time immemorial have been because people can't thoroughly express themselves to one another. You know, is it real? Are you really going to spread democracy? Are you going to steal all their resources? Why are you taking their resources? Because we need them. Why do you need them? We need them more than them for these reasons. Like, there's a complete lack of communication that's happening. Is there a way to distribute it better? Probably. But I think that what we're seeing happen to our species right now is a fundamental shift in sense ratios. Like, let's look at the texture of language. Like, I think this is going to become a thing. And I think that because I'm trying to make it a thing.
Okay.
So the texture of language, like language has vibrations, different words denote intentions. And so if I say to you, you are an incredibly well thought out individual, and I love the way in which you're able to express your ideas, that thought has a texture to it. And if I put it into a synthesizer or an equalizer, you could probably see the wave function of it. And I think that translates to people in a different way. And I think there could be classes where people, regardless of what language you speak, the shape of that word hits someone in a way that is meaningful. And that's what I mean by the texture of language. I believe that this could be something that a group of people who don't even speak the same language could get together, and you could see that wave function, and it would show an emotion register through a smile, through a light up of the eyes, through an eyebrow flash. But I think that that's something that could be brought into teaching language. Like, the texture of language is meaningful. And when you begin to think about that, wow, now you can see language through an equalizer. You can see language through the emotions of people. But like, on some level, I think AI and all of this information is being coalesced into it. Okay, you monkeys have just begun to get vowels. Like, our first language is vowels. English is a vowel. But now we're learning how to put vowels together with words and images that'll be like a sentence. And the next generation will actually be able to communicate on a level that's meaningful. It seems like we've been passing. Is that too far out there? What do you think?
No, I like it. I like how where you're going with it. What I what I have to think back on is uh, I think in many older civilizations, the word language is seen as power, right?
Yes.
Spelling. It's like casting spells.
Ooh, I've been hearing that a lot.
I remember like what is it? I think I have it here. The four agreements, like the Toltec
Right.
book. Yeah, right. He also
book.
talks about language again, about the spell casting with words. And I think what you're hitting on is like it has less to do with the words and more with the intention behind the words.
Yes.
And maybe some words capture that intention better than
Right.
others. So maybe some words are more powerful or are better vehicles for capturing
Yes.
meaning or
Yeah.
conveying
Yep.
energy or
better containers.
Yeah. And yeah, I am very curious what is happening to us as a species in the information age, and we're in the middle of this massive experiment because we don't know yet. I sometimes get the idea that like an upsurge in neurodivergence or people that get diagnosed with neurodivergence, I don't think it's only that we have better diagnostic tools and that it happens more. I do like to take that, for instance, I think Gabor Mate makes about a lot of these things being trauma related, which I can, which sort of tracks for me, or I think it fits.
Agreed.
But there might be also a sort of adaptation happening, so neuroplasticity to this sort of high informational load, this environment. But without making a moralistic point about it, is this good or bad? Because we can also talk about that. But I think on a sort of base level, it's a species adapting to an environment, and that might be also illustrated by these sort of more cases of neurodivergence, be it ADHD or different types of autism. It has something to do with sort of how information is processed, right? I often have to think back on the Jiddu Krishnamurti quote, which I just really like. It's no measure of health being well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. And so he said it somewhere in the 60s, I think, or
Yeah.
70s. That was before, well, mass media was there, but that's before this mass information technology.
Yeah.
And if I have to sense for myself, so this machine, I struggle, man. And I don't think it's no. I think it's the way how this information is shared, especially on these algorithmic based social
Right.
media platforms. I think it's yeah, it's like almost a psychic warfare. I also remember the quote somewhere that was it yeah, marketing is peacetime propaganda.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I it kind of is. So
Of course.
I'm not sure if we as humans are capable of adapting fast enough to this changing environment. And also, I am not sure if we would want to, if that is a desirable change. So it's a bit of a yeah, depending on where you see the world going.
Yeah.
I'm more in the favor of pushing the brakes somewhat, but there appears to be no cockpit where there is a brake, and so it looks like we're in this thing.
Yeah. It's Bernaysian economics on a level that is out of control. Yeah, I'm fascinated by propaganda. I'm fascinated by mental techniques that manipulate behavior, whether it's good or bad. It's mesmerizing to me to see how language or a spell or, you know, getting people to see things a certain way will cause a certain behavior. And I'm not sure the people that are in charge of that machinery are thoroughly aware of the unintended consequences that they've brought about. But I don't think they're going to be good for the people in positions of authority. It's like, look, we're going to
Yeah.
modify this. But what about this? I don't know if we as a species are capable of thoroughly understanding the unintended consequences. And, maybe when you say you want to put the brakes on things, are you thinking about the way in which, the AI genie is out of the bottle, or is that what you mean by the acceleration?
Oh yeah.
Okay, tell me
Yeah,
about it, man. Why? Why are you gonna put the brakes on
yeah.
for?
Yeah. So I was also sort of reading into AI. So in the past couple of years, what I initially got into when I started worrying about the state of the world,
Mm-hmm.
I very quickly got to human systems because I thought, okay, I can read up on climate change and on biodiversity laws, but these are all or social collapse. These are all symptoms of an underlying cause, or
Mm-hmm.
at least these are all symptoms of something else. And then I got into overshoot, which is a phenomena which is used in ecology, and it explains how a population can overshoot the carrying capacity of its
Oh
environment.
wow.
So meaning the amount of food that's available. A simple example is, for instance, you have in Canada or a place with islands with fjords. In winter, the fjord freezes over. A couple of deer make it to an island, and then in spring the snow or the ice melts, and these deer are stuck on the island. There are no predators there.
Mm.
So what happens is they'll just eat and they'll reproduce, and you'll get more and more deer. And what will happen is that they will overshoot the carrying capacity of that island, and after that they will starve.
Yeah.
But what happens in that overshoot, so the ecological debt that is built up in that population growth, uh, it will the debt will be or will cause more damage to the environment. So what will also happen is that the carrying capacity is not a stable thing. It's not like, okay, this island can fit 3 deer. That's it. It's also a dynamic thing. So what will happen is that as these animals are starving, they'll start eating more and more, also things that they wouldn't normally eat, which will further debase the ecological carrying capacity
Mm.
of the island, and that will further plummet down. So overshoot often happens when species are found in an environment without any um, how do you say, without any breaks.
Right.
sort of from the environment.
Right.
And I sort of started looking at the human growth curve after looking at bacterial growth curves for years in the lab. It kind of looks similar, and I thought, okay, it looks like we're in overshoot. Why? Why are we in overshoot? So overshoot on the y-axis is population, but it's population times consumption. So it's also how much does an individual of that population consume. Depending on that will have an influence on the carrying capacity, right? So you have also this Earth Overshoot Day website where they say like, okay, if everybody would live like a person in, I think it's a person in the Netherlands, use up that amount of resources, we would need 3.6 planets. And then, so you have different rates for different places in the world. But if everyone would live as the average person in India, we would need 0.9 planets. And so these are of course large metrics, but it's illustrative of a point. So it has something to do with that consumption rate. And what I was thinking is that a major part of that consumption rate is our culture, right? It's the consumer culture. It's the way we actively pursue consumption as an act, something that we really want to do instead of consumption for just survival. And again, I'm saying we, Western affluent world. I'm not saying people in, I don't know, in poorer places. And so it's interesting then to look at what are the drivers in the culture that do these things. How are we a non-life affirming culture? What are all the underlying drivers of this? What is causing all these things? That's something I'm mainly interested in. But I'm also interested in what are the accelerators of the current problems. And AI, I think, is mainly an accelerator of the current problems, and not a problem solver.
Okay.
And I initially thought I was clever when I was reading on AI risk, and I read a bit on, of course, well, Ian McGilchrist, but also Jean Baudrillard, which was like he was called like the archpriest of postmodernism. Very difficult. I found it very difficult to read, but I like this idea about hyperreality, which is a point. Again, I have to just. This is my interpretation of it.
Sure.
What he describes is a hyperproliferation of symbols and signs. So the map, the things, not the physical reality, not the thing itself, but are symbols of that thing. And the more we live in an abstract or a symbolized world, so as we are talking of on a digital platform,
right,
it's also human crafted signs and symbols, and as we are more living in that world, he says that what will happen is that our map of reality will start replacing reality. So we're creating a map that one-on-one fits, we think one-on-one fits the physical real, fits the planet. We are replacing it with our representations. And the Anthropocene is the world shaped by man. So we're sort of projecting our inner world on the world, and we're changing it to fit our inner world. And what I was thinking with AI, or the main point that he was making, I think, about hyperreality, is that it's also becoming then very, very difficult to discern what is real anymore, because the real is actually disappearing, right? Because we're replacing it with what is in the air. What he says is the hyperreal. As we are doing that, so we're replacing the real, it also becomes more and more difficult to communicate about what is actually real. Because the map, we all have then different maps in our head about the same thing that we're looking at. But the thing that we're looking at might already be also a hyper artificial thing. So a city is like a virtual reality already, because it's a projection from what's inside of us, and we make it physical. And my to get back to the point,
Yeah.
where I thought like, okay, the main threat of artificial intelligence is not Skynet taking over the world, or that we're all going to be unemployed. It's just that we're going to lose even more, or we are going to accelerate our communication and our coordination problems that we already have in the world, because we are not going to be able to make good sense anymore, because we're not going to be able to be sure that whenever we're talking about something, that our words actually mean the same thing, and that we're actually talking about the same thing. Because if we have generative AI and we're spending an average 5 hours or more, I don't know what the latest metrics are, on digital devices,
Hmm.
that is our reality.
Yeah.
If we don't know how it's generated, or even if we would know how it's generated, it's we're getting a weird map of the physical real. So our human ancestors would live on a savanna, and their physical environment would very much correspond to their mental environment, because they're constantly living in that world. Maybe they every now and then have shamanic trance sessions, and I don't know, out into the stars, etc. We are spending most of our time in a digital environment, and most of the world is getting replaced with a digital environment. But it is also making it super difficult to communicate, to make common, to have a mutual understanding. And I thought that is probably the main threat of AI. Then I read that I think the one of the main guys at Google also stated this, so I was happy with that.
Yeah.
But then I heard Daniel Smachtenberger talk about the threat of AI, and that just felt like a punch in the stomach. Then I was like, ah, it's even worse. He said like it's an accelerator function of all the current technology that we have running, debasing the world. So
Mm.
our the sort of the global growth machine that we call the economy, and AI will is an optimization tool. And if we don't set our directions right, if we don't align AI correctly, then it will optimize all these things that are currently destroying the world. And it looks like we're doing that.
You know, it's such a conundrum because it's, you know, first off, it's interesting that the richest people are the people saying, "Look, we're using too much." Like that's a pretty big problem just in itself, right there. Like, you know, and it seems to me that, you know, if you look at COP28 or any of these climate situations, everyone shows up in their private jet. The very people that are concerned with ruining the world are the people that have developed the technology to do it. And like, it seems to me, if you want to lead by example, like,
Yeah.
you know, words make fantastic stories, and I love language, but you can say something till you're blue in the face, and if your actions are different, people aren't going to listen to your words. And
Yeah. This
you know,
is yeah.
right? It's gargantuan. And when you think about AI being an accelerator, like what it's accelerating the winning techniques, the so-called winning techniques of people in positions of authority. And now they're like, hey, wait a minute, you guys can't do that. Only we can do that. You guys can't do it. We're gonna shut it off for you. Like
Yeah.
that genie's out of the bottle. Like they're the people that have the most, us living in the West, and the people that are above us. Like these people have to fundamentally change their lives. Otherwise,
Yeah.
nothing they say is going to do anything.
And again, it comes down to our definition of winning. So it's so
Yes.
there. Yeah, I think again, I think Daniel. I heard him say that. I like that. He said, um, "There is no winning in a self-terminating system." So you might be temporarily winning. It's the same
Right.
like if you have spleen cancer, the cancer might be winning.
Yeah.
Thinks that it's winning. It's I'm
Yeah.
acquiring more resources and I'm
Yes.
dividing more often. Oh, that's
I'm
great. It's
winning.
going well. But that at a certain moment, the host will die.
Die. Right.
Yeah, and I agree. It's a very tricky thing because it quickly devolves into also into politics and how to
Yeah.
solve these major world problems. And
Right.
I think, again, a lot of my ideas come from sort of system thinkers, and
Yeah.
it's so how do we do global governance without global government? And at the moment, I think there's a lot of focus on how do we do it with global government. And
Mm,
I think a lot of people are rightfully so very worried about where that might lead. And
right.
there's, of course, a plethora of conspiracy theory and all
Sure.
this other shit. Also, again, it's a map that's made over physical reality, and it's super
Yeah.
difficult to discern what is actually really happening or what are the motives. Or so again, I find this also super difficult to navigate, and I'm
Yes.
not fully sure on. I think also again, certainty is something that should be treated as suspicious.
Yes. Well said.
If someone is too certain about what is going on, because certainty is also a tool that gets wielded like, oh, I'm certain that these are the bad guys, so we should just you just kill them all, and then
Mm-hmm.
so anytime that gets used, and I see it a lot in the current media, right? It's
Sure.
the hyperpolarization again, and but the big problem there with, as you also pointed out, is the hypocrisy of those that speak about, okay, we have to
Yeah.
lower emissions and net zero, and yet these billionaires that are greenwashing more or less.
Yeah. That's well said.
It's the again, it's the signal that people pick up. So the
Yeah.
signal is right. The signal
Yes.
is that yes, there is something going awfully wrong with how with the trajectory of global human civilization
Mm-hmm.
and our population. It's just that there are a lot of bullshit merchants peddling their different explanations as to why this is happening, and
Right.
those explanations often get used to further their own goals, and that
Yeah.
happens on the whole political spectrum. uh, and indeed, then, but when these hypocrisies are then not also admitted,
Mm-hmm.
then that further polarizes people. Because if someone, let's say, traditionally conservative, I'm just going to use that as a, so you progressives and conservatives. If a conservative person specifically says, for instance, okay, yeah, but renewable energy also requires that we mine in Congo, and how green is that? Why am I not green if I drive
Right.
my gasoline car? That's actually a point. And then what often happens in the discussion is that um, people will be called, or people who are concerned about the how we're going to adapt to climate change, or yeah, or to this changing planet, often uh, will get thrown into a corner and be called denialists or blah
Sure.
blah, whatever works for this bipartisanship. Well, actually, it is a good question, and it is a very difficult way. And again, it will come down to what is our definition of winning, or what is our
Right.
definition of adapting, or that we start talking about these things, and that we get a shared understanding of what do we actually find important, what are values actually.
Yeah.
And I have the sense that at the moment we just recently had a elections in the Netherlands, uh, which wasn't a very surprising result. There was one of the traditionally far right parties won, or
Mm.
had the most um, votes, and it seems to be, yeah, again, getting back to the problem of
Yeah.
AI, it seems to be a communication problem, as you mentioned before. It's how do we get from this floating hyperreal map where we're constantly in our where we're overexposed to all these different ways of seeing the world. Some have more truth in them, or have more, let's say, have a higher resolution than others. But how do we get down back to a sort of felt human level, where if you're communicating with someone, you see each other first as a human, and then later you can talk about that map. But then vet, what do all these words actually mean when we talk about, I don't know, when we talk about adaptation. because the first person, some person will see climate adaptation as like the 15-minute city conspiracy
Hmm.
or that kind of stuff, or
Yeah.
the WEF, industrial agriculture, blah blah blah, all this top-down kind of stuff. Well, another person might see it completely different. If
Yeah.
they talk about adaptation, they might think of no, localized energy, smaller wind turbines, communal living, blah blah, all this kind of stuff. And the moment that we don't know what it
Right.
actually means to the other person, what the word actually means to them, then we start going these. Then we're not communicating; we're just sending information.
Yeah. It, I feel like we're getting to a point where either or is being replaced by both and. Like, let's talk about like a 15-minute cities is both. It's a great way to contain resources and have people live a more meaningful life, but it is also very constrictive. It's also definitely limiting your ideas, it's limiting your beliefs, it's limiting what's possible. It's both,
Yeah,
and like I, I think
and
it,
again, I
people should
think
see, yeah.
can I add? I
Yeah,
think that the
please.
15. I think that the 15-minute city. I've been curious about this one
Okay.
because I don't. So I try not to go into sort of internet rabbit holes and then just
It's so
investigate
hard,
conspiracy theories.
right?
It's like, okay, I'll just enjoy reading fiction then. That's a time well spent
Same
for me.
thing, it's the same thing.
Yeah. But with the 15-minute cities, I have a sense that it's very American or very United States of America focused because the infrastructure of the US is so car based, right?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
how the suburbs function and that everything is so stretched far apart. That's of course a logistical nightmare if you run out of gasoline or if you run out of electric vehicles.
All right.
Um, so it costs so much energy to move food across all these massive uh, and it's of course again a worldwide problem, but I think the 15
Yeah.
minute city problem is a very American one because
Mhm.
I think here in the Netherlands most of our cities are 15 minutes
All right.
because they are older than a couple of hundred years old,
Sure.
and then we didn't have cars and you
Yeah.
couldn't, it wasn't like, okay, I'm gonna get my milk, but I'm gonna I don't know, I have to be on horseback for 2 hours to get my milk. So of course, then it yeah, the infrastructure already makes sense. But now, yeah, how do you do that in a country that was built with the car in mind at a certain moment? And if that, yeah, if we're looking at peak oil, so if we're gonna have declining returns on oil, fossil fuel is it's like a battery, and it's not being replenished. So at a certain moment, will run out. So how do you future-proof or adapt to that? And then I can understand that this idea of 15-minute cities makes sense. But you have again the top-down approach,
Right.
where I can also understand some of the let's say the more cynical, or I would say what quickly gets lumped into conspiracy thinking. Conspiracy
Yeah.
thinking is already like it has a very negative connotation,
Yeah.
and it doesn't have to have that because there might
Right.
be quite a bit of truth in some conspiracies.
Sure.
And I'm also not that trusting of any very large
Certainty.
scale top down, yeah, again, certainty of very large top down systems that again try to create a left hemispherical map approach on
Yeah,
the world,
totally.
saying like, we use this template for a city and we put
Hmm.
a stamp.
Yeah.
While living, adapting systems, they will adapt to their environment. And I think if, again, if you're on a boat and you have to navigate a lot of, um, let's say you're navigating a place with a lot of small islands and it has very difficult um, tides, or there's a lot of, um, let's say it has reefs. It's a very difficult to navigate area. Let's say you're on there, you have a perfect map of where all the reefs are, and you want to go to that. You want to go to island A, but if it's calm weather, then it's great. You have that
Yeah.
map. because the map very much matches the environment.
Yeah.
What if there was a tsunami the day before and it's now storming? Are you going to use the map to navigate, or are you going to just pay a lot of it? You're going to use both, most likely, but are you going to pay a lot of attention to what is actually going on in your environment? Maybe the reef has changed. So
Yeah.
if we're going to a very changing world, yeah, I put way more favor in bottom up living systems that adapt to
Yeah.
things instead of bureaucratic.
Yep.
Here's your carbon credits.
Yeah.
Not saying that these solutions might not work on a larger scale. Let's put them to use for industry. I don't know,
Right.
but yeah, it's a very difficult. It seems to be very difficult to navigate.
Yeah. You know, when I think about I read an interesting article a while back, and it was talking about some college was building a new part of their campus, and they had put up these beautiful buildings. They had this wonderful architect that came in, and when it came time to lay the sidewalks, the chancellor's like, don't put any sidewalks in. I'm like, what are you talking about? Where the kid's gonna walk? He's like, exactly. Why would we lay the sidewalks? Like, let's see where the kids walk, and then we'll lay the sidewalks. Because in the other parts of campus, there's all like these dirt paths. And anybody who's ever been to a campus, like you see all these shortcuts that people take. So why lay down the foundation, until you see what the best course is? See, like if you look at ants, like I have an ant problem in my house. And these buggers, man, they always make these, like they'll make a line from here, from A to B. But if I kill them, then they'll make a line from A to C to B. And like, there's another thing with slime molds. I read an article, or I was speaking with Mark Viola, who told me about this slime mold project. They made an agar plate in the shape of Japan, and they put these slime molds in there, and it cut these trails through it. And it's almost the exact same thing as the subway. Like, look, we have a way of self-organizing. We are a giant collective self-organizing system. And when people up top try to start making decisions, like whether it's a corporation or a government, it's the same thing. And they make poor decisions because they don't have the information of the collective on the bottom. They're looking at it from like this top-down linear approach. And that might be another reason why we're beginning to see this non-linear way of doing business taking over. Shout out to the octopus movement. What's up, everybody? I love you guys out there. But like maybe that's what's going on with this non-linear, neurodivergent. It's a return to the bottom up sort of organization. What do you think?
Yeah. No, I hear you. I think that's true, because it's also an adaptation to this sort of the top down, and I think it's easy to see that most of our top down systems are poorly aligned at the moment. With a life affirming future, and it's very difficult to realign them within the confines of how they are structured. Right. So the incentives within those structures are by probably already, because they are so poorly aligned, they cannot be changed within that system.
Yeah.
And I think then these different bottom up ways, as the situation is evolving, you'll see that come up more and more. But you will also see more and more restrictive, conservative old ways. So I think we're in a what will happen during what is happening during collapse, because I feel like we're in collapse.
I agree.
We will see both happening at the same time. So you'll have places where there's more and more coherence in this sort of different way of seeing, different ways of seeing the future and trying to adapt, and you'll see more constriction on the other side. Yeah, so it's again an and thing. Yeah,
it's interesting. I think we are in the midst of a collapsing system. And I was speaking to a gentleman yesterday, and he was talking about jobs and some fast food restaurants, and he had mentioned, like, man, they'll pay like $25 an hour to work at a fast food, but and there's nothing wrong with that. But the point we were saying is that the people that are at the top of institutions, be it government or industry, you see the people on the bottom uprising, whether it's the Arab Spring or whether it's the unions fighting in the US, it's the yellow vests. People on the bottom are sick and tired of doing things without any meaning to them, no matter how much money you pay them. And the people at the top
Yeah.
are like, this is ridiculous. You know how much money we're paying you? And the people at the bottom are like, I don't care. It's not about
Mm.
money, man. It's no longer about money. You could pay someone thousands of dollars and they're not even going to do it. Like
Mm.
that should be a direct reflection to everybody at the top. This industry is garbage. No one wants to do it. And you have to pay people lots and lots of money to compromise their values just to do it. You might even have to replace the local culture with indigenous people to do it because no one wants to do it. And that's a short amount of time. Those people are going to be pretty fed up with it too, you know. And it echoes a dying system. And you know, I'm not an industry leader. I'm not in government, and I don't know what the answer is, but I don't think the answer is continuing to force feed people these solutions that don't work.
Yeah.
Like, what do you see when you see a collapsing system? Like, what do you see happening, or do you see any rays of sunshine that are beginning to happen?
Yeah, no, yeah, I'm not. I would say that by my temperament, um, okay, I can have very pessimistic tendencies, but my heart isn't that way. So it's
Good.
what is it? Scratch a cynic, and you'll find a bruised
Yeah.
idealist.
Yes, well said.
I think that. Um, I think again, it's both. So
Yeah.
as it's collapsing, we're seeing the most egregious forms of tyranny will we see and will emerge and will
Mhm.
uh, become worse and worse. And we will see people people connecting in ways that are actually human, and and that is already happening. I think
Yep.
there's so much impulse towards these. I use the word life affirming. That I think life with a capital L, so it's sort of
Yeah.
sacred life affirming practices of humans as a species stepping up to be a keystone species which serve the ecosystem, which serve the global ecosystem. And I actually, or I really feel that that is possible, and that we are being
Yeah.
called and asked by the planet to do that.
Yep.
And we're seeing that, and at the same time, we see doubling down on the. I would call it the maybe even the cancer. So the
Yeah.
sort of the yeah. I'm playing around with this metaphor, which yeah I'll probably write about at some point. It's that we're in a planetary metamorphosis, uh,
I love it.
specific like with how a caterpillar moves to the butterfly,
Yep.
and there are all these different stages that a caterpillar has to go through before becoming a butterfly, and it's almost like they're all like initiation rituals. And I think we as individuals are going through this, but we're also going through this as a collective, but also as a planet. So I think Gaia, as the planetary system, is also moving towards its metamorphosis. And what I feel is that what I just call a cancer. I think so. So the caterpillar behavior program is to acquire as much biomass as possible while fending off attackers,
Yep.
so not be eaten. So it's a quite fearful. I again, I have to anthropomorphize
Yeah. Why
the
wouldn't you? Of
caterpillar.
course.
I don't know what it's like to be a caterpillar, but I can imagine it's a quite stressful experience as it's eating and making sure it's not being eaten. But it's very focused on that. But at a certain moment, the caterpillar will, after a series of molting, so it will lose or it will grow new skin and then move on. It will have to curl up under a leaf and then spin itself into a chrysalis, into a cocoon.
Mhm.
and more or less die, because the caterpillar will lose its entire structure, and it will still be metabolically active. So all these cells, so it will decompose, but then we'll have to recompose or compose into a butterfly. So it's this super drastic transition phase that it goes into. And what I think
Yeah.
is happening is this is happening on different scales in different individuals, and also in our society it's happening in different ways. And we still have this old program, old program for some civilizations, or I think for some places on the planet, there's still a lot of accumulation going on,
Mm-hmm.
necessarily accumulation, because there's a very low material welfare. But in other places where we're massively affluent, where we're over consuming, um, we're kind of being asked, I think, to step into this cocoon and start shedding this old program of just wanting to eat constantly. And what I would call the cancer is maybe even a virulent form of this caterpillar that is just maybe has a some insect world is brutal, right? You have these different types of parasitic wasps that, for instance, lay eggs in other insects, and then these larvae will control the behavior of
Yep.
the host. So maybe, as a global civilization, we have a parasite injected in our skull that's keeping us in this overconsumptive mode.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. I identify with that on so many levels. You know, and if we inject the ideas of the book The Fourth Turning in there too, and we just look at our species as the caterpillar, you know, like maybe this giant generation of the boomer generation dying is the chrysalis with which we're about to break out of. When we start looking at a lot of these older ideas, maybe our metaphors, our language, our ideas, like here's a giant portion of us. And when I say us, I mean humankind. Like, you know, this generation is facing the unrealized dreams, and there's all these wars and these silly ideas that like younger generations like, that is so dumb. You're gonna get up and go work for 50 years and never do anything you want. Like that is an old idea, and it doesn't serve us anymore as a species. Like, and you know, like I think that those things are dying. And I see it in my own life too. Maybe it's because I'm going through a midlife crisis, or maybe it's because I've decided to change who I am, that I can feel like the caterpillar and understand the metaphor of new life. But, you know, on some level, but clearing all these things out of my house, what I realize is, even though it's stressful to maybe lose your home, getting rid of things has made me realize all these things that I've accumulated here have got in between the relationships of the people in my life. Getting rid of things has helped my communication with my wife and my child be better. Like, it's mesmerizing to think of, like, just get rid of this. And I'm like, why can't I get rid of this book? And I'm like, oh, it's a first edition. Oh, you know, but like, that's so dumb. Just who cares? When was the last time you read it, George? I've already read it 3 times. Okay, well then maybe you should give it away to somebody to read it, you know? But you start thinking like, why am I holding on to this? And if you speak to older generations who have to go and clean out their house, or they're getting ready to move, like they have that same problem of letting things go. But I think it speaks to your metaphor of like, look, the world is calling us. Look, start letting go. And if you talk to any death doulas or people who spend time with people on their last days, I think that those are the conversations the younger generation should be listening to. And some of those things they say are, you know, they never say, I wish I would have worked longer hours. I wish I would have made more money. No one on their deathbed says that. They do say, I wish I would have been a better husband. I wish I would have been a better wife. I wish I would have been a better son. I wish I would have been a better parent. You know, these are the things that the next generation should be listening to, of like, okay, well, let me make those changes now. And maybe that's the earth telling us. Maybe the earth communicates to us through us. And this generational talk of like, hey, here's what you guys should be doing for the next generation. But it's fascinating to think about. And I love that metaphor, because I see it in my life, talking to you and other people. Like, I see profound change happening in real time. It's hard to change. It's hard to grow. It's hard to let things go. It's wonderful though.
Yeah. No, nice. I like the points that you bring in there. It's letting go and all these different
Yes.
levels. And it's also what I also feel there's also much needed compassion for these old things because they got
Yeah.
us here.
Yes.
And that's also these old programs or these old ways of being. Material accumulation, yeah, that also brought us a lot of material wealth and safety. We've
Right.
just been in a 70 plus year after Second World War. We've been in this
Yeah.
planetary growth or planetary banquet stage
Right.
with the fossil hydrocarbons, which allowed the human caterpillar to gorge, to grow, and to grow, and
Right.
to grow. And this biomass will have to decompose, so we'll have to move out of its current composition, the caterpillar composition. But
Yeah.
those materials will not go to waste. They can be used to become this butterfly. And
Yeah.
it's the same in our inner journey, our inner processes. Is all the survival mechanisms and the trauma or the coping that you constructed around trauma
Yeah.
got you here,
Yeah.
got you to the place where you are, and letting go is also putting to rest, and but also honoring. It's like giving a funeral. It's or doing composting. Let it feed
Yes.
whatever wants to grow next,
Yeah.
and that's the art of that flow of letting things go. And
Yeah.
then if we come full circle again with the Ian McGilchrist, the left hemisphere thinks in linear sense. The right hemisphere is way better in thinking in flow in
Yeah.
these larger movements. So yeah.
Yeah. It's fascinating. Does the caterpillar have to eat? Does it eat its way out of the chrysalis, or does it break through the parts that are weak?
I think it breaks through the parts, and
Mm.
then it has to. I think because if it doesn't able to, then its wings will.
Right.
So that for the butterfly, the wings will not be strong enough to fly. So
Mm.
it will have to also do that.
Ah. Yeah, and you could see some of the institutions being the weak spot in the chrysalis, be it education or government or
Yeah,
labor. Like maybe these are maybe the sun is shining through, and we're like, hey, we can break out right here.
yeah, yeah. It's a call. It's a
Yeah.
continuous. I think a continuous call to. Um, I like to I heard it somewhere called hospicing work, and I really agree with that idea because hospicing is
Yeah.
taking care of that which is dying and really taking care of it. So giving something a good death, and it's honoring as well. And I
Yeah.
think in modernity we are so used, and revolutionary thinking is so used in destroying the old, or get
Hmm.
if only we get rid of the old, and I don't mean the old
Right.
people.
Right.
I
Right.
mean
Out with the
old
old, in with the
systems,
new.
old, yeah,
Right.
exactly. But like it doesn't go anywhere. So it's like it's also how we treat in our type trash. We treat it like we throw it in the trash bin, and then we feel like it's gone, but we actually know where it goes, right? All these
Right.
plastics, they go into the oceans, they go into our clouds, they go into our water, they go into our bodies. Nothing is ever gone in that sense. So these parts. So if we don't honor the old things, the old systems, we're just setting ourselves up for
Yeah.
more problems by really presencing and sitting with the situation and everything that is, and then accepting. And I think then accepting in the Buddhist sense, so not accepting and saying like, oh, this is I accept you, this is great, but more like accepting that it's reality. So I accept that the things are as they are. Then we can decide on how to deal with it and how to orient ourselves towards the future. But as long as we're not accepting things as they are,
Yeah.
we're seeing things as problems, and then we're thinking to quick fixes, quick
Hmm.
solutions, and then we're causing more problems.
Yeah. There are no shortcuts.
No, no.
Man.
Although at moments you would wish that, right? There are always moments where you're like, if only things were easy. If only
Yeah.
blah blah
Yeah.
blah, we wouldn't have this economic system. If only
Yeah.
all this stuff. But yeah, unfortunately, it appears to be. hard work.
Yeah, I like what you said earlier too, a moment ago, about when you were speaking about letting go and thinking about the things in our life being a catalyst to get us where we are, and maybe that's part of embracing the old, is realizing these things were necessary. That
Yes.
crisis in your life, that was
Yeah.
the catalyst that brought you to this stage. Like, you needed that, and on some level, being aware of that allows you to deal with it, or at least embrace it in a way that isn't frightful. When you can
Yeah.
embrace something and be like, oh God, I'm so sad. I'm so sorry this happened, but at least you're embracing it with
Yeah.
the understanding that it was a catalyst to get you somewhere. Sometimes that's
Yeah.
enough.
Yeah. 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 For sure. And that is, again, it's the I think the major part of um, mm, dealing, or not dealing with, that's I don't like that word. The major part in resolving trauma is acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
And because it is trauma, because we don't accept it, so it is kept outside of us, or it's kept frozen as not part of the self. The moment we start accepting it and welcoming it back again, it can start to move with us again. But there's a big good reason usually why we keep trauma outside, because it hurts, because
Mm.
we cannot deal with the heavy emotions. And of course, there are very different gradations of trauma with a capital T and a small t.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, yeah, acceptance, yeah, and from compassion, of course, yeah, compassionate acceptance of the situation, and that's presencing again. That's sitting with how reality really is, and yeah, you perception is key again, to see things as they are, or as good, or as, yeah, as good as you can are able to do that, to see things as they actually are, with all the pain that comes from it. And that's also with the pain, for instance, for a collapsing society,
Yeah. Yep.
biodiversity collapse. Yeah, that hurts. That is really painful. To me, I feel that a lot, but for a lot of people, that's incredibly painful, and it should be painful because it's incredibly sad. But what is there to learn from that? What are we being asked to do? That's constantly the question that I ask. It's like, okay, how do we listen to this? What is, how do we make not only meaning from this, but also how do we let this meaning inform our behavior? What are we being asked to do?
I feel like the world is on some level like our uncle or our big brother, and it's like, hey, stop hitting yourself, stop hitting yourself. Like, look what you're doing, you dummy, knock it off. Like,
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
but like, passionate acceptance, like, that's profound to think about. You know, and when you talked about, we're bumping up against the solution problems to our prior solutions, a large part of these problems came from us not came from not having passionate acceptance, from us wanting to do more, from wanting to, hey, let's stop these people from dying. I don't know, can you? Like, let's look at old people in the old folks home. Let's stop them from dying. Let's put them on this machine and put them in a room and feed them food and charge the insurance company 10 million. Like, is that passionate acceptance, or is passionate acceptance like, here, let's go have a big party? And I don't have the answers to that. And maybe each
no, no, no,
individual gets to say that, but on a
no.
grand scale, maybe that's what we're coming to as a species, is of like, look, we can't control this. And
Hmm.
maybe there's some things we shouldn't try to control.
Yeah, yeah. I think I haven't read it yet, but I listened to an interview, that conversation with Ian McGilchrist and Dugald Hine. And Dugald
Mm.
Hine I also admire. And I think the title was also "The World Is Not a Problem." And
I love that.
yeah, and it really comes down again to that values indeed. What are our values? What is important in the world? What do we see? Because we see death, we see it as a problem to be fixed.
Yeah.
Death is a part of life. I'm not saying that we shouldn't we shouldn't make sure that people don't die of diseases that can be treated, all this kind of thing.
Right.
But if we are so death averse, a thing that is without death, life doesn't exist.
Mm.
Death and life are intimately intertwined. They're two sides of the same coin. By saying or by being so death averse, and I think that is causing a lot of problems in our world. That's one of the drivers. This fear of death.
Maybe the main driver.
Yeah, yeah,
You, you know, we
yeah.
think about language like palliative. Pa is the root word. That means to cover up. You know, when you have palliative care, you're covering up people dying. You
Mm,
know, it's the Western attitude towards death. Like we don't want to talk about it. It's taboo. We don't want to be around it. We don't want to be reminded of it. You know,
yeah,
we're afraid of it.
yeah, yeah. Well, again, it's we're being currently we're actually surrounded by death, huh, on a
Mm,
massive scale. So we have biodiversity crisis. That's death of the natural world or the wild world. But we're also I saw this metric of the amount of animals that get slaughtered each year in industrial agriculture.
mm.
It's insane. It's really really insane if you just yeah, if you stick with it for a moment or so, feel into that. So we're surrounded by death, but we conveniently put it out of view. So in the
Yeah.
Netherlands, you have several areas where the Netherlands is a big exporter of meat, and that's all mostly all factory farmed. But you have all these stables where the animals are only kept indoors for their whole life under these horrible conditions. But they don't have any windows. Huh? And
Mm.
so if you cycle through the land, it's like, oh, there's all these big stables here. Well, actually, in there, it's horrible conditions and these animals being slaughtered on a mass scale. And it's the same with all. It's the same. Okay, I will just make this. It's the same
Yeah.
with old people's homes. We also
Mm.
put people dying. That's something that happens not around us. That's just something that old people we put away in old people's homes. It's not integrated in our society. We don't have a. I read somewhere that modernity sort of ruptured civilization in a sense that it isolated all the different generations. So we don't have a culture, but we have youth culture and middle age culture and elderly people. And by creating so much space between all the different generations, we don't have a there's no passing on of wisdom in that sense. And of course, this happens in smaller scale, but I'm just saying on a societal level. And death, the lesson of death is super important. If you learn as a child that death is a part of life, that should be something that you actively
Yeah.
feel and have to come to terms with. But if you never encounter death on in a personal direct way, then probably you'll start living with the idea that that is something that happens to some. And then if you become aware that you might die, you'll probably be super scared of this, and then you'll look for all these different ways of escaping death or coping.
You know, it's interesting to think about the way we as individuals treat the world is might be a reflection of how we're treated. And if you start looking at factory farming, you know, they have the little cows over here and the big cows over here and then the slaughterhouse. Kind of sounds a lot like what you described about a youth culture, middle culture, and then we don't talk about the slaughterhouse. You
Yeah,
know, and what does happen when people become aware that they die? Well, then they start pulling out of the system. Like, hey, wait a minute, I'm going to die. I don't want to work here anymore. I don't want to do
yeah,
this stuff that's not meaningful. And maybe
yeah,
that's a reason why culture goes a long way, or propaganda or the message goes a long way into making sure, hey, don't worry about dying. Go bungee jumping. Hey, isn't this girl cute? Hey, isn't that guy handsome? Like, why don't you think about sex and started thinking about dying? You know, like the our world hides death, at least in the West, I think for that reason. Because on some level, we are factory farming. Like we do things to animals that happen to us. How could we not? Like that's in our nature. It need not be that way, but and maybe that's what's happening. Maybe we're awakening to this idea that, look, we're much more than a race from the hospital to the graveyard. And if you want to take it on another weird, sad level, like what happens to aborted babies? What happens to your child when your child's stillborn? That baby's taken and made for parts, in a lot of places. I know it's sad to talk about, but the same thing with old people. The same thing on your license in the States. Oh, hey, are you an organ donor? We're going to make sure you're an organ donor. We're going to put that sticker right on your card when you die. Like, whoa, wait a minute now. Like, let's talk about this. People don't want to talk about it, but on some level, we start getting into this idea of Soylent Green.
Okay. Yeah. Nice. Yeah, and again, the common denominator is factory, right? It's an industrialized model. Industrialized model of civilization.
The Industrial Revolution.
We can have a whole discussion about that, but that sort of comes down to I'm quite critical about technology in that sense, how technology is used to shape the world. So technology has brought us a lot of great things, but it's unchaining. I have to think back on, I think Engels from Karl Marx and Engels. I think he said that the capitalist is like the sorcerer who lost control of the spell or the creature that he summoned. And I think technology is that we and of course technology you have to first define what is technology, but let's say material, just the technological way of how we administer the world, or how we sort of treat the world in a lot of our systems. I think that has a sort of mind on its own, or that is something that was it's a super powerful way of manipulating the world. But if it's not couched in wisdom, then we end up in situations like we're in right now, I would say, in the 21st century. It's the drivers behind it, to come back to the fear of death. And if we are not aware of what drives us, then we're just being driven, right? And if we are, I also had this, I wrote this, I think, in a post. I have the sense that we're living in a massively traumatized society, or we're a massively traumatized species, and we're dealing with millennia of trauma in our system, our body, so stored up trauma in our bloodlines. And what do traumatized people do? They cope, they survive. You're in a survival mode if you're traumatized. And I think the majority of our consumer culture is based on coping, and it's optimizing for coping, for strategies of not having to deal with that trauma, not having to feel. And again, looking at it this way makes me way less angry towards people or towards systems. It makes me feel way more compassionate towards people, because it's like, oh shit, we're just a lot of hurt monkeys or apes, and we're trying to get by. And only those who are, let's say, most fortunate, be it in their social surroundings, but also in their material surroundings, have the presence and the opportunity to resolve trauma and not get re-traumatized.
Right. It's well said. Like it takes quite a bit of time, at least for me, to stumble upon compassion from anger. And maybe that's a learned behavior after a while. Maybe after someone traumatizes you enough, you begin to find compassion for that question of why would they do this? How could they do this? Maybe that's where the compassion begins to seep in. But it is interesting to think about those being anger and compassion being similar in some ways, because the way through anger might be through compassion, like, because you have to be angry at something, you have to be super pissed off before you can empathize with someone who's pissed off and be like, oh man, I bet you something happened to their kid. I bet you something happened to that. Like, and all of a sudden, once you begin to embrace that anger, then like a balloon pops out that little bubble of compassion. Like, oh, maybe that thing happened. Oh man, I bet that did happen.
Mm.
Now it happened to me. In some ways, it's you have to have a little bit of quiet time, be it in a safe space or having some surroundings where you're. I don't know. Do you think you need that? Do you think you need to have material possessions or at least a little bit of wealth to get compassion from anger?
No, not necessarily.
Yeah.
And I think the journey to compassion is, how to get there is different. I think there's different paths. And I
Yeah.
think with anger, it's important to notice that anger is passion. And so you can only be angry about something if you're very
Yeah.
passionate about it.
Yeah.
And so why are you passionate about it? And anger can also be just simple sending out boundaries because you're passionate about your integrity, be it
Yes.
your physical integrity or your moral or mental integrity. It's a way of standing up for yourself or for someone else. It's passion. Yeah. To go back to the question. No, you don't probably need material wealth, but I think you
Right.
need enough material wealth in the sense that you're not in survival mode. That's what I mean with it. That you're not, so you have a bit of shelter. You're not uh, uh, chilled in the rain, or you're not constantly looking for food, or you're struggling to survive. It's difficult to. I think the moment if your physical body starts deteriorating because you are in poor conditions, it will become more and more difficult to have a compassionate outlook on things. I'm not saying that it's
Yeah.
impossible, but
Right. Do do you think compassion can only, or do you think the compassion may come more easily with more life experience or lived experience?
yeah, probably, and maybe even uh, I would call it then soul. So sort of,
Mm.
mm, yeah, more lived experience on this planet or on other planes of existence,
Mm.
reincarnating. Yeah, yeah.
What you had written a little bit of, well, I was reading a post about AI versus real ecology that you had posted about.
Mm.
And I
Yeah.
think that maybe you can unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, I think that was the I referenced the video of Nate Hagens, who I
Yes,
follow.
that's the one.
Yeah, and he more or less explained the point that what I used previously is that a lot of people see AI as a fixing or as a tool that fixes things,
Mm-hmm.
but are not aware of the material cost that's behind AI. So how much energy it actually has to use, computational power, and all these kind of things. Let alone how it's aligned. If it's aligned to actually fix the problems that we want them to fix. And so Nate Hagens, I think he said, using AI to fix climate change is like using gasoline and a bit of math to fix a forest fire. I like that point, and I thought, like, yeah, because what he talks about is he constantly uh, hammers down the point of energy. That the base of our society is energy and not money, um, and that we are living in a time where we have a crazy amount of energy, which seems to be free because we don't pay for oil. We only pay for how much it costs to extract oil.
Right.
So the oil itself, like it's nature's bounty, let's say. So we're getting it out of the planet, but it's something that is is super precious. And if you think about it, I like the analogy, or I like the using the story of, if you have let's say you have um, a liter of gasoline. So you can hold it in your hand, like you have yeah, you're American, so it's a different system. But never mind. So this small amount of gasoline, right? Um, you can put that in a car, and then it can drive about 16 kilometers with that, or 18, depending on how. So it can move this very heavy thing. It can move it for so far, but you can also load the car with way more stuff. So the crazy amount of energy that is in just this small liquid form. And if you then think about how much energy would it cost you to push a car for 16 kilometers, and it's like we're not. He uses energy blindness again. Nate Hagen's watches stuff. It's really really good. He uses the term energy blindness for this, and I think it's super apt. And it's the same with AI. So it's the energy blindness behind how much does this all cost. We're so blind to what it costs. Put in a we put in a plug in the outlet, and then things run. But we're never aware of. I'm also not aware of how much energy things cost. I have to spend time to be aware of those things.
Have you read any of the? There's a few camps when it comes to AI. One of them is looking at it through the lens of, like, Elon Musk sometimes is worried about it. And if you look at what happened with OpenAI recently, and Sam Altman, being fired and then let back, and being bought by Microsoft, and OpenAI being a private company, like, a lot of people are worried about AI, and it seems that the AGI, artificial general intelligence, seems to be a sticking point. But have you read any arguments to the idea that of the accelerationist, and how it could be a positive thing? I'm curious if you read about that particular.
I a couple of years back, when I was reading into philosophy,
Mhm.
I was interested in the sort of accelerationism as a sort of what is it, movement? How would you call it? And there are a lot of again, the term has now become problematic because it's associated to all this far right shit. Um, but yeah, I was interested in it, and the idea of, like, okay, if we accelerate fast enough and we can create this artificial super intelligence, if it's aligned well, then we can solve all problems of humanity. All this stuff. Um, yeah, I see that as a continuation of the myth that we are already living in, so the myth of progress.
Mm-hmm.
And the myth of progress has been promising us. I read this somewhere. I really like this. That the myth of progress, matching the scientific or matching the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution, why it is our dominant myth of how we see the world, is it because it was more potent than the previous myth, which was uh, the previous myth within Europe, so within Western Europe, where the scientific revolution really took off, which was Protestantism, or belief in God, as in the you will reach the kingdom of heaven when you die. But what the myth of progress offered was the kingdom of heaven here on earth through progress, through technological advancement. And that's such a tantalizing prospect. And I think that is a base driver of a base assumption of our systems, uh, let alone of the people who have a lot of power. Because there's also the myth of progress, is that, we can also become immortal in this life. So we can become the gods. And that's a myth as old as civilization. I think Tower of Babel was a myth of humans wanting to become gods. I think that I'm not sure. I think that the pyramids, the Egyptian pyramids, were also the sort of most advanced technology that the civilization had at that time, to allowing their rulers to become gods. That was also to join sort of that space. So I think most of the very utopic talk about AGI and artificial ASI, artificial superintelligence, I think it's mostly informed by this myth, and I have serious doubts whether the artificial intelligence that we have right now is anywhere near what happens in consciousness or human cognition, or and if it can actually reach that. Again, there's this. I'm only cursorily aware of the different theories in that field, but I think it's a very physicalist argument that that consciousness emerges from enough computation. I think that's one of the main ideas of this sort of. And then I can figure like, okay, yeah, if we put enough complex computation, create enough complex neural networks with computer, then it might become conscious at some point. I don't think that consciousness arises from matter. I think that consciousness is primary. So yeah, that yeah, to give a sort of answer on how I look at it.
I love it. Yeah, I don't think you come into this world. I think you come out of it. And I don't know that we have the ability to, like, we already give life to beings. I don't know that we could create something else, but it's interesting. It's fun to think about. On this topic, when we think about the world we're living in and all the amazing tools we're creating, have you read any science fiction where AGI is a positive force?
Nice. Oh, that's a good one. Whew. Let me
I don't
think.
know that I have. Like it always starts off good, and then like you start seeing these little cracks and like
In the recent one by Andrei Tarkovsky, I think you
Children of
Brit.
Time.
Yeah, yeah. I think AGI, the woman who is the AGI, with sort of a template for the AGI. She's
Mm-hmm.
batshit insane,
Mm.
but after enough sort of uh, being embedded enough in a sort of wise system, she sort of does well. She still has
Mm.
she's still very rude mouthed and has her own ideas, but is aligned with humanity. But yeah, I'm curious that maybe it's also just incredibly difficult to construct a life affirming AI, one that is
Yeah.
aligned to really uh, positive outcome, and moreover to make one that is not, maybe it's easier to make one that's life affirming than it's one that is affirming to us as a species. So maybe it's in the large scale easier to make a AI that's wise enough to see sort of the whole course of life. So sort of this endless creative process of unfolding uh, uh, complexity,
Mm.
something that is aligned with that, than to make something that is aligned with humans as we are now, because we are not aligned at the moment with that
Yeah.
unfolding process. So yeah, yeah,
It, it blows my mind to think. I think the science fiction writers are amongst the most creative and imaginative and wonderful people when it comes to their stories. And it blows my mind to think that perhaps the most imaginative among us have trouble imagining this being a good thing.
yes, yeah, man, yeah, yeah.
Like
And
not
I
even
think
these guys can imagine it.
yeah, and I think the future. Uh, yeah, I have to go in a bit, but I think the future is something that pulls us towards it. So maybe
Yeah.
futures already exist,
Yeah.
and sci-fi is a creative way, any way of art, fiction, vision work, is a way of mapping these different types of futures
Yeah.
and then seeing if we can align to one that makes sense. But then to get back to your point, I think that we should be worried that a lot of the fiction on AI is dystopic. Maybe that's like a very good, maybe that's like a good sort of marker or ruler to see like, okay, if we can hardly think of a positive way of doing this, should we?
Right. Yeah. Simon, I love our conversation, man. So much fun. We take a
Yeah,
nice circuitous around everywhere, and we have to do it more often, and we should do a panel, and we should conversate more often. I know you have to go. I'm super thankful for your time. Thanks for sticking with me this long. Before I let you go, though, where can people find you? What do you have coming up? What are you excited about?
uh, yeah. Cheers, man. I also I enjoy the conversation. It's fun, and for
Me
me,
too.
indeed, it's just stepping in. We'll see where it goes.
Yeah, I love it.
Nice. Next time we could talk way more about fiction. That's fun.
We should,
That's
yeah. We
good.
should have started that part
Um,
earlier.
yeah, I would say most people can find me at on my LinkedIn profile. Currently, I'm using that. I'm working on a website, but it will be more informed on what I do professionally. And I think my LinkedIn is just people find this interesting or just want to have a chat with me. Then you can just send me a message.
I would recommend everybody do it. Simon is an
Nice.
amazing individual. He's fun to talk to. He's one of the most well read people I've ever had on the podcast. And he's got a unique view of things that will help you challenge some of your regular ideas. So I'm really thankful for it. Hang on briefly afterwards. I'll talk to you just shortly afterwards. But ladies and gentlemen, I hope your Monday goes amazing. I hope you have a beautiful day. And I hope that you choose to let go of all the things that you think you need and put in place the things that'll make your life better. That's all I got for today, ladies and gentlemen. Aloha.